I call on Deputy Martin Kenny to move for leave to introduce.
The bill. This bill is to amend the provisions of the Local Government Water Pollution Act 1977 to provide for the granting discharge licences by a water service authority for the development of single houses and to provide for related matters. For the past 6 years, there has been an ongoing problem getting planning permission in some rural areas where soil is heavy and fails the percolation test. All of these problems flow from a strict new Environmental Protection Agency guidelines which were adopted by Government and lodged with the EU as part of measures to prevent groundwater pollution from septic tanks. The strict regulations on rural planning has led to rural decline and indeed depopulation in some parts, mainly in County Leitrim and other areas with heavier soil. The EPA guidelines state that if a percolation test fails, there must be zero discharge of effluent. Zero discharge is impossible and has effectively imposed a ban on building in many rural areas. This part of the EPA guideline rules out all reasonable engineering solutions or proposals to treat and dispose of the sewage effluent when the test fails, regardless of how high the treatment standard. The EPA guidelines also state that where the test fails, the local authority can issue a wastewater discharge licence. However, the interpretation of legislation at present around the discharge licences is that they should be used for multiple houses or industrial settings, as in small housing estates. In fact, the regulations refer to the discharge of over 5 cubic metres of effluent per day, which is about the volume produced by at least 6 to 7 houses. This interpretation of discharge licences only being for multiple dwellings is effectively copper-fastening the ban on rural planning, even with the use of the most environmentally sound sewage treatment solutions. I am proposing to amend the Local Government Water Pollution Act 1977 to change this and clearly accommodate the granting of wastewater discharge licence for single houses in rural areas where the T-test fails. I have consulted with the EPA officials and with planning and environmental experts in local authorities and in private practice over the past several months on the appropriateness of discharge licences for single houses where percolation test fails, and all agree that this is a workable solution to this problem. The licence can be designed specifically for single houses where the conditions of the licence could include the installation of a mechanical sewage treatment system from which the effluent would pass through a polishing filter and then be discharged into a reed bed and willow pond. This type of treatment method has been used extensively on sites with poorer soil conditions prior to these new EPA guidelines coming into effect, and they work extremely well, with the final treated discharge water meeting the highest environmental standards. The cost of installing such a treatment system with a wastewater discharge licence would fall well under €20,000, but may require a small licence fee. Now, in the past, we've had situations where people have been opposed to single houses in rural areas because there have been too many of them built in too close a proximity to each other. However, if you like, the excess in one area should not be an excuse for a famine in another, and that's what we see in many areas of rural County Leitrim, particularly where we have parishes that we can't build houses, no new young families coming into them, and it is a really devastating situation for those areas. So for several months now, I have been consulting with legal advice to establish the correct path and part of legislation to amend and test that it will have the desired effect without causing any unintended consequences. We examined the planning and development laws, the pollution laws, the EU directives and all the other statutory instruments. I am satisfied that this amendment is the best way to accommodate people in rural areas to build a home for themselves and their families and to still comply with the EPA guidelines. It may cost slightly more for a person building a house to comply with the licence, but at the same time it will protect the environment more than adequately and hopefully bring some new life back into these areas. I expect that I will get the support from all members of the Dáil for this bill, which, if getting passed into law, would mean so much to communities, particularly in depopulated rural areas. So I commend the bill to the House and seek leave to introduce.
Thank you very much, Deputy Kenny. Is the bill being opposed? It's not being opposed, so the motion for leave to introduce is agreed. Can I ask Deputy Kenny to move that the second stage be taken in private members' time?
I move.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Now, recommend